This conference will now be recorded.
I see Commissioner Bangs and Commissioner Webb. I know that, well, Commissioner Thompson is here. Excellent. Hello.
Hello, thank you. I really appreciate your support. Thank you.
Everything good?
Well, I'm a hot mess, but he's fine.
Good. Wonderful. That's great.
Thank you, sir.
And I don't see Commissioner Toyoka, but I do see we're at 12:01. So we'll go ahead and get started here. We'll start our board communications and Commissioner Banks.
Board communications for me, I have been reading 989 pages. So that is what I've been doing this last week. And I'm at like page 400 and I don't know, 50 something. I'll let you know what I think when I'm done. It's a lot of pages. And I'm looking forward to our legislative update to see if I need to write more things or read more things.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Banks. Yes, 1,000 pages in an HCP. You're a lot farther ahead than I am on it. Commissioner Webb.
Sorry, I really don't think I've got anything reportable at the moment. Lots of meetings and other things going on this week. So I'll have more to report next week.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Webb. Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, sir. I attended the Mass Timber Conference, most of it, and it's always enlightening to see what the newest technology can bring us in terms of ecologically sustainable economic development and networking with people and all that sort of things. Particularly sweet moment at AOC, I was acknowledged for bringing compassion into the room and helping my colleagues there integrate structure with compassion and come to good resolution. So the upshot of that is you've got all of the AOC proposed information. The only thing I would comment, the county manager's note about the due structure indicated the base fee structure we've been paying. I don't think it indicated the additional amounts we've been paying. So it exaggerated the increase, I think, but we'll deal with that later. If anyone has questions, it's been very complicated. It's now a little complicated, but not terrible. And I'm happy to go into that more with people, continuing to look at housing in terms of what do we do in the legislature with the bill to get us tech support? Is it possible to take it forward? Do we have to give up for a couple more years? That's still not clear to me at this point, but I'm poised to speak on our behalf, hoping that we will get additional funding for administrative infrastructure. I've got meetings scheduled to listen to concerns about wildfire and water, because I went to one of those, but there's more. There's a series. So lots going on about environment and economy and our stakeholders and colleagues. That's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Commissioner Toyoka.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. Not a whole lot, just but a couple of brief comments on our ordinance for right-of-way. A lot of constituent correspondence, face to face, people stopping me on those issues, and a lot of it is quelled easily when you let them know that it does not affect state highways. A lot of people get in, they don't realize that. They think anything in Clatsop County, but when you actually clarify that, no, this is just for county roads, not state highways, it diffuses probably 90+% of the people, which is wonderful. The other lot of big issue that I'm having, I've talked to city manager Mark Winstanley briefly, and I'm going to have further conversations with the sheriff about Wahana Road, the new school in Seaside opening. So there's a lot of traffic issues, a lot of just probably stuff that they didn't, they knew would happen, but it's exaggerated because of Corona. A lot more parents driving, hardly any kids taking the bus, which I think in a normal school year you won't have the same issues. So it's like you don't want to overreact and try to instigate a lot of measures that won't apply next year, hopefully. I'm staying positive that we're going to be done with this and it'll be in our rearview mirror, but I just think it still needs to be addressed for now, and some of the traffic issues between our sheriff, because it's county road and city road, that one stretch. But I think if we address that, I think that'll diffuse, pretty much everything for now. And then the remainder, as we develop, our resiliency project, and I'm the more I read, the more I study, the more I get delving into this, I think a lot of zoning and land use issues in our county will change. If we look at those harder, I think from housing to traffic to a lot of issues can be aided in infrastructure as we look at those and maybe rezone, and look at land use in our area. And if we can redesignate some as the area grows, I think it'll help take care of a lot of infrastructure issues. So that's all I have for today.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Toyoka, and appreciate your work on that. Good points. I just had a couple procedural things. So do we have an executive session today? No.
No, we do not.
Okay. I've got a hard stop at like 1:45, and I don't know as we'll take this long, but I know that the Habitat Conservation Plan is our last thing on the agenda. And I don't see a time designated for it, but I am going to have to leave at 1:45 no matter what today. So anyway, we'll go ahead and go right into the legislative update. So Philip, turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner and Commissioners. And to help on time if need be, I have 5 bills that I was going to report on. 2 I can cover in about a minute or so because one is dead, which is good. That was one I think we were opposing. But I do want to leave time for Ryan Tribbett, our PacWest president, to update you on the renewable energy bills. We received an email saying that you guys would like an update on that as well. So if it's okay, I can cover the one bill, move the others to an email and get that in your inbox, and then pass it over to Ryan. The one bill I wanted to cover was 3260. That was conversations we had previously. That's up for this week. It is the bill that's related to having LOC, AOC, housing, and DLCD put together a consortium to help apply for grants for those counties that are rural and maybe don't have professional grant staffers on board. I have had a robust conversation back and forth with AOC on that. They are going to have a courtesy hearing on the 8th on this, but they do not plan to move the bill. The 2 agencies have said they are not ready for this. AOC has said we're not ready for this, but we want to keep the conversation going. So they are still asking for support. I think it is a good bill. We would advise it's a good bill. But they just are not ready. They have no structure in place. They need that time. And so with that context, I might structure a sample letter of support for you guys to review or just consider if that's okay. But I just want to make sure you guys know that they do not plan to move it. But they want to keep the conversation going. And then Commissioner Banks, you had forwarded over 4 of the other bills, and I will get that in an email to you. The one is about the diesel tax. That bill is dead. It did not make the chamber of deadline. So, and the others I will put in an email to you. So, but then can I pass over to Ryan? That will be, and he will capture kind of the renewable energy conversations I've been playing.
Yeah, that's great. And just so you know, we don't have a huge rush. We have 20 minutes that's allotted for this, and that should, yeah, so we're fine. Go ahead, Ryan.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having us. Yeah, I sent out a report on a couple different clean energy bills that are being debated in the legislature. I think some of you, probably a lot of you, remember a couple of years ago when the legislature, when the last sort of walkout happened, it was over the cap and trade bill that was being debated. And after that happened and the session adjourned, the governor sort of went through in a fairly aggressive process of executive orders and issued from each of their agencies to try and figure out what did they have existing statutory authority to do to try to clamp down on emissions and move towards greater energy efficiency and more clean energy and whatnot. And while that took place and they took some pretty aggressive steps through administrative processes, they did run up against a statutory wall of the lack of authority around what was the main core element of that cap and trade bill from last session, which was the cap on emissions. And so to do that, they would have to change the statute. And so there's been a 2-year process now being underway, led by multiple different groups. There's several different, 3 different proposals that have been introduced, 2 that have varying levels of momentum behind them to try to get towards a 100% clean energy goal. And so those were what I included in my report. One of them is House Bill 3180 that uses an RPS, an accelerated RPS standard. So that's just a sort of mandate on utilities, investor-owned utilities, to by a certain time frame and benchmarks, have a certain percentage of their portfolio of energy usage from green sources. The other one is House Bill 2021, and that one is using an emissions-based approach. That one is really sort of the cap portion of the cap and trade bill from last session. And so they've been having some dueling public hearings over the past several weeks on these bills, and there's been a lot of these are like 70-page bills, and there's about 14 amendments just on 2021. So, basically, there. I can cover the broad strokes with you, and then if you guys have questions that you want to drill down on, I will probably have to do some real digging with a fine-tooth comb to answer with specificity between all of the different sets of amendments. Just this week, I think there's been three new sets of amendments, and it's only Tuesday. So the basic framework is to have a 90% renewable by 2035. Both of those are the same in both bills. And then a 100% renewable by 2050. And so one uses a sort of aspirational goal for utilities to address emissions and best efforts made. It has language in it around some pretty tough, strict labor standards around the use of project labor agreements. And there have been some concerns raised from some folks that there may be a loss of or a worker shortage issue in some of the rural areas to be able to man this amount of work. And so the pathway that the utilities have taken to sort of be a pressure release valve is that there's no requirement that any of the energy actually be produced within the state of Oregon. So if in the instance that those procurement standards, the strict procurement standards become impossible to meet, they can simply go acquire green energy from out of state and meet their obligation for the emissions reduction. The other bill, and that's the 2021 bill, under 3180, the accelerated RPS, there aren't quite as many tight procurement standards. It's a lot of these investments are made by private developers and then sold to the utilities. And so there's an effort made in 3180 to try and take some of the accountability measures that exist in public procurement processes and try to nuance them and adapt them to work for private sector, where the sort of accountability, the chain of accountability is just different than public works. And so that's generally the basics of the two different approaches. And I'm happy to answer any questions or attempt to answer any questions. I know a lot more about the politics that are going on and surrounding those bills than the individual technical aspects of the amendments, just for the sheer size of them and the number of them. So.
I see Commissioner Thompson has, thank you, Ryan. I see Commissioner Thompson has a question.
Thank you. And this may not be an answerable question, but it's what's top of mind for me. One is the reliability of the systems that provide us with power, and the other is the cost to consumers. Is anybody looking at impacts on system reliability? Because if our producers are having to go out of state, that's a more attenuated system. It seems to me that's inherently more prone to risk in terms of the supply, and I'm concerned about the cost to consumers as well. Thank you.
Okay, let me try to answer those. Reliability has definitely been a focus of the conversation, and resiliency, especially after everything we saw that happened in Texas during the last cold snap. And so that created a focused energy on that topic. And CREA, who you probably all know is really the one at the table for local governments here, is supporting the 3180 bill. And a lot of that does have to do with the reliability of the system and the support for more in-state generation, smaller generation facilities that are more distributed more evenly around the state. For both the resiliency and the economic development benefits of having those energy facilities in a more evenly disbursement around the state. The other one was about cost to consumers, and in that one I think is the one where I think there are very smart people on both sides that are not in agreement on this. So the utilities believe that the more aspirational one under 2021 that leaves their options more open, has greater off-ramps for non-compliance without any real penalties in place, is the more cost-effective approach by that set of measurement standards. And then you have like the Eco Northwest study that the proponents of 3180 procured, and that study finds that when they did the look at where the utilities were making investments and what they had already sort of estimated for their costs, actually adapting to a clean energy standard and building that is actually the cost of solar and wind has come down so much that it actually doesn't have a demonstrable, by their estimate, impact on cost increases. The utilities would greatly disagree with that and say that there's billions of dollars of additional costs. And so it really, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder on that one. But a lot of very smart people and economists and people are putting together forecasts. There's just no consistency between them. Yes.
If I may.
Mr. Thompson.
It is not a surprise that experts on both sides disagree. So thank you for that wry observation. I wonder if anyone has looked at disproportionate impact in rural and urban Oregon for the costs and the risks of the system.
That one I am going to have to get back to you on.
Mr. Banks has a question.
And I'm sure it's probably been discussed in these conversations, but have they discussed the how? Like, I mean, being able to provide the numbers and do the things, but have they discussed how or how they plan to accomplish such goals?
Both of them use simple mandates to direct the utilities to just simply procure energy that does not emit over their current standard by a certain amount of reduction. The other one does it through saying that a certain portion of their portfolio is mandated to be from renewable sources. Again, there's differing opinions from people of which ones send more clear market signals that would spur more investment faster. And but yes, absolutely. They both use the mechanism of a state mandate to simply force change from the utilities' actions.
Any further questions for Ryan and Philip? And Ryan, Philip, do you guys have anything else you'd like to add?
Just one thing that Phil mentioned in his, he mentioned in passing that Bill didn't make the chamber deadline, and I just didn't know if you guys knew what that was. But a couple weeks ago, we had the first start of what we call the Chamber of Origin deadline, and that is the posting deadline. So they had to populate agendas for the 3 weeks and show us what the total universe of all of the bills that they were considering. So if it was a House bill in a House committee, it had to be posted if the committee chair was intending on working it anytime this session. And same thing applied in the Senate. What we have is the second part of that Chamber of Origin deadline coming up exactly a week from today, and that is you have to pass it out of committee. And if any bill that hasn't passed out of committee by the 13th is dead, at least for this session, or should I say that bill number is dead. Policies have a funny way of springing up in amendments to other bills with relating to clauses, as I think we've all seen. But it's a big deal for people in the industry when these deadlines come, because you look at this universe of bills and there's some, 2,300, 2,500 bills, depends if you're counting policy bills or budget bills. But just to really start to narrow in what is the total, the things that are actually potentially in play. And even a lot of the things I'd say that made it onto the posting deadline are not actually going to pass. Some of them are really there because committee chairs have hopes that negotiations on certain policies are going to end in a positive way, so they put it on they post it for potential action, hoping that those things come to consensus. In many cases, they don't. And then aside from that, or in addition to that, you also just have time constraints. Zoom has slowed everything down, this virtual thing, committee meetings. And so they're not getting through as many bills. What you've seen when you started the 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, when you saw all these populate, you had like 7 bills on one committee agenda and 7 bills every single day. When they only got through 4 bills, then 3 more are added to the 7 on the next day. So now there's 10 bills on the next day. When they get through 3 more, there's 7 to roll over to the next day. So now there's 17 bills on the next day. So you're starting to see that snowballing effect where you're looking at these agendas going, there is no way they're going to get through half of what they have left on those agendas. Yes,
Yeah,
Commissioner Bangs.
Commissioner Bangs has a question.
When we come up to that deadline, is it possible to get a list of bills populated both by those that have died and those that are continuing forward?
Absolutely.
Okay, and possibly, because I have the House district bills via other resources of what's live right now, but I would like it, like all of it.
Yes, absolutely. I think some of the things that, especially from the local government perspective, some of the things that are probably going to make you most pleased are going to be the list of things that have died at the Chamber of Origin deadline. So we will have a heading specifically for that.
Well, thank you very much, Ryan, Philip. Appreciate your time. Appreciate you tracking all of these things for us. Have a good rest of your Tuesday.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
We'll move on to our public health update. So our County Health Director, Margot Lalich, is here. At least I saw her, and I'll turn it over to her. Margot?
Hey, hi, commissioners. Apologize for that. Too many screens open. Nice to see you all this afternoon. Have a bit of an update. As always, we are busy and full. We had 5 clinics last week, 2,800 shots. So we had clinics Monday through Thursday, and then we had our largest event Saturday at the convention center. Thank you for Commissioner Quayla for being there, and County Manager Don Vaughn was also there, which always elevates spirits. We gave 940 shots on Saturday. It had just this seamless flow to it. You know, with that many people, you're always going to have, you know, little glitches here and there, but overall, it was really a perfect venue and a great partnership with our other colleagues like the Sheriff's Department who provided security. It was great having medics on site. We had lots of interpreters on site, and you know, we were scheduled to go from 8 until 1, and we closed doors at 1, and by 1:30 we had all gone different directions. So we're really getting this down to a well-oiled operation, and we're back at it again. Yesterday there was a clinic at Seaside High School, clinic today. Tomorrow and Thursday, those 2 are at the fairgrounds. We're looking to give 1,400 first doses, approximately 1,200 second doses. We've given a total of 17,000 doses so far in the county, and 5,500 people are fully vaccinated. Again, you know, we keep hearing about Johnson & Johnson. First, we're going to be getting more vaccine. Now it's going to be delayed. We're in the now it's going to be delayed conversation again. But the Moderna is here, and we're vaccinating folks. We have the priority groups have expanded, as I'm sure you've read in the bulletin and heard on the news. In Oregon, affirmed, I'm always going to say for now, nothing is in stone anymore, its definition of a multi-generational household. So that's definitely added many more individuals to our equation. And again, being really clear within that multi-generational household, who is actually eligible based upon the type of vaccine that we're administering. There's some confusion out there, and just to be clear, if you're being asked questions, the Moderna vaccine is only approved for 18 and older, and people are thinking 16 and older because of the Pfizer, and we're not administering Pfizer in the county. Now, with more data that comes back, I would expect that guidance to change, right, as we're learning with all of this data coming in terms of efficacy, etc. But for now, it's 18 and over. Our focus groups also are 18 to 44 with underlying conditions. And again, every time the eligibility changes, we immediately go in and update our vaccination survey. And at this point, even though we're prioritizing, we're just telling people, go complete the survey, because we can filter out all the data, delete any duplicates, and so it's become quite efficient. We're also almost finalizing our plans to vaccinate all the seafood processors, and that's going to be happening around April 12th, and including the fishermen as well. So Lisa and Chris are working very closely on that. You've heard me mention homebound populations. That's actually a little bit more complex. What I'm finding is it's taking a lot of time to work through the duplication, because many of those individuals are receiving resources and supports from multiple agencies within the community. So we have all these lists going around, and so I'm trying to collate that data. And our PIC, the Public Information Communication Center, has been very helpful, and they're able to go through some of those lists and call and confirm whether or not individuals have been vaccinated. We have more people now saying yes, they're homebound on the vaccine survey, but not necessarily. So again, we're confirming that those individuals are truly homebound. And we just today allocated and transferred 50 doses of Johnson & Johnson to Providence Seaside Hospital. They're a great partner, and they will be then doing outreach to their homebound population as well as their home health patients. So, and then I'm also looking at reaching out to OHA support for their support. They have teams that are mobilizing to vaccinate homebound populations. There's logistics involved in that, a little bit more than the fixed site clinic. So that's where we are with that, as well as reaching our homeless population as well. We're at a moderate risk level, as you all know. And we are on the cusp. I have a couple emails I haven't had a chance to answer yet with questions about should businesses prepare to go to the high risk. So as you have your conversations, you know, it's challenging. And we were just, Chris and I, on Friday night, we meet with the clinical providers in the community, is that we are going to see more cases. We're still working within the same metrics, right, for the risk level. And yet, we're being told that we can open up more. People can move about in the community more, right? We're seeing less people wearing masks. It's spring break. There's more people here. It's fantastic. Everything's opening up. Schools are meeting more in person. Kids are playing sports. So we are going to see more cases. The challenge is, if it moves us into that high risk level, it becomes that much more challenging to shut everything back down again, right? And move across the spectrum. So I imagine that's going to be a lively conversation with a number of counties like ours. So I will keep you posted, and the message just continues to be, even though people are getting vaccinated, even though we're being told we can go travel, the reality is there are still infections, and people need to wear their masks, and they need to wash their hands, and they need to stay home if they're symptomatic, and they need to get tested. OHSU is needing to move its resources to some other communities. I asked them if they could stay in Clatsop County for 1 more month so we'd get 2 days of testing, while we develop a plan to continue testing more than 1 day a week. And so that's my update for you today. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Any questions for our County Health Director? Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, sir. Excellent report as always. And just even when your news isn't great, somehow I always feel better when I listen to you. It's quite an amazing phenomenon. So repeated testing. I mean, should people get tested more than once? Is there anything that would indicate that somebody should get a retest? What do you think?
There's no reason to get a retest. The state is monitoring breakthrough cases because we are seeing them now. They're very much focused on the long-term care facilities, of course. And within our databases where we receive what are called electronic lab reports, we're now able to get more detail in those lab reports if it's a specific variant. And so the investigative guidelines that you've heard me mention, and about 44 pages long now, there's specific guidance around those breakthrough cases. And we do want to do testing, and there are special kits that counties have available to them if there is a breakthrough case, the type of specimen they want and where to send it and that sort of thing. So again, as much as people are having this sense that, you know, the sun is out, it's a beautiful day, more people are getting vaccinated, life is returning to a new normal, the reality is we're not done yet, and we're not through this pandemic, and we're still learning a lot of information. And so as much as we welcome coming back to life again, so to speak, we also need to continue doing our due diligence.
Commissioner Bangs.
And I just had a couple questions for clarification purposes and to make sure that I'm passing on correct information when people ask or request. As long as we stay under 40 cases in our 2-week period, will we remain where we're at, if not lower?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Excellent.
the cases that we are, yeah, and the cases we're seeing are not like just a new outbreak, right? We did have an outbreak, but those are not all the new cases. They're sporadic, they're household. So it's not attributed to just one particular setting.
Okay.
It's just
And then my
community
second,
spread.
oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
My second question was when they do wish to test, are they still being requested to test between days 5 and day 7?
Oh, of their symptoms? I'm gonna have to double check on that. Yeah, I'll
Okay.
double check on that, and I can send an email out to Commissioner Cuela, who can send it out to all of you that answer. I know when we're testing and who's staffing our testing sites, but I'm so focused on vaccination that I'm not completely confident I'm up to date on everything related to the testing. So I'll get back to you.
And lastly, I just want to say thank you for having those robust conversations and advocating for our, what I feel is a very special county that has, special needs in regards to how we are looked at on how best to serve our community. So I appreciate that we have you right now. I so appreciate that we have you right now. So thank you for your work.
Thank you very much.
I think Commissioner Toyoka had a question, correct?
There we go. Well, while we had Margot, I just had a question. So I get hit on this every day, and I don't have the appropriate answer. The CDC reports have total death in America, like 2020, 2019, 2018, and it's pretty unchanged. It's about 0.8. And then they're saying there's excess deaths of 500,000. But if the total death rate hasn't changed, can you please help me understand the excess when the same number of people are dying like 2020, 2019, and then they say there's like 500,000 excess deaths, but to a layman like me, if there's excess, you would think that there would be 500,000 more people who died than normal, but it remains
Right. Yeah, I'm going to need to go back and look at that data and look at that language and go a little bit deeper so I can get you what I believe would be the most appropriate answer. If it's all right, I don't want to answer that right off the top of my head, just to make sure. So I will follow up on that as well.
Thank you. It's pretty confusing.
It
People
is
are showing you, yeah, when they come up to you and say, hey, 2020, we actually had less people die in America than 2019. So I don't understand the 500,000 excess deaths. And I have no answer.
Well, the excess is what I'm thinking, but don't hold me to it, that the excess is because it's a deviation pertaining to the pandemic, but I don't know how all the data is being calculated. So let me look into that and I'll get back to you.
Thank you.
It's a great question. Thank you.
Any other questions for Margot? And you might have said this. Oh, Commissioner Webb does. Commissioner Webb.
Do you still have a need for volunteers?
It never hurts to have individuals sign up to volunteer. We screen them. Some positions they need to have very specific training, like around data entry. And then of course we clinically screen all of our volunteers. But I think there's going to be an ongoing need, because while we're vaccinating intensely and eventually we're going to go to 2 days a week, all day clinics, we're going to be vaccinating for the next 2 to 3 months, and people will get tired. Summer is coming. So if you know individuals who want to volunteer, please direct them to the county link to be able to do that. We appreciate every one of them. We couldn't do it without them.
And the other thing I just wanted to say is that I'm getting nothing but positive comments about the process that vaccination is going through. As a matter of fact, there's RJ Max has a editorial in the Daily A today, and it's there are very few issues on which I ever get no negative comments, and this is one of them. So you must be doing a great job.
Well, thank you for that. We try to hang on to those because, of course, we debrief every clinic the next morning, and you know, we're so determined we're striving for perfection that sometimes we forget that in the bigger picture it's working well and that it's meeting the community's needs. So thank you.
And I would just tack on to what Commissioner Webb was saying. I had 5 people who either got vaccinated on Thursday or Saturday that came up to me afterwards and said, or called me or texted and said, it was just such a efficient process, well managed. People were friendly. They were in and out of there within 20 to 30 minutes. They really appreciated how well organized and well managed it was. And I was there for Saturday morning, and I know there were 200 people that came through in that hour, and I would have never known it because it was just steady, and people, you know, there weren't any lines. It was really well handled and managed on Saturday, and from what I hear on Thursday as well. So terrific job. And then the movement. This was the movement week for OHA. And we were underneath the 40, so we will remain in the moderate starting
Correct.
Friday for 2 weeks.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to when I have an opportunity to have a conversation. Our Tuesday noon meeting, I would expect that this is probably will come up and I'll be able to see it in the notes, which I pass on to you, Commissioner Cuela, but we are in the moderate level. We'll stay there.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you very much, Director Lawlich. Appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the Planning Commission of Applications. The Myrna Patrick replacement, and Gail Henriksen is here. I'll turn it over to Gail.
Thank you, Commissioners. Gail Henriksen, Community Development Director. And as Chair Aquila said, we are in the process of filling the Planning Commission position that was held by Myrna Patrick. She represented the Northeast area and submitted her resignation that became effective February 28th. So we have advertised from February 10th to March 12th. We received 2 applications. One was from Michael Magyar, who would be in the Lewis and Clark Olney-Woluski district, and he previously served on the Planning Commission. And then we also received an application from Jennifer Rasmussen, who currently serves on our Northeast Citizen Advisory Committee for the Comprehensive Plan Update. And she, again, would be from the Northeast Planning Area. So we've brought these names forward just for your information only today, and we will be bringing back a formal agenda item on April 28th. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
I see Commissioner Thompson has a question.
Actually, it's not a question. I just wanted to express my profound appreciation for Myrna Patrick's service and for that of her husband, Sam. They've just been a wonderful couple for decades, doing wonderful public service in Clatsop County. So thanks to Myrna and Sam.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Any other questions or comments? Okay, if not, thank you very much, Gail. And next is the Budget Committee appointments on page 13.
So I will be presenting on behalf of our Budget and Finance Manager, Jennifer, because as of Sunday, she became a parent to a little boy. She had an 8-pound, 9-ounce, 21 inches little boy who is named, I believe, Matthew Howard Daniel Carlson. Sorry. So anyways, just share that news with you. And similar to Gail, we have vacancies on the Budget Committee, the countywide Budget Committee, recognizing Sam Patrick. He stepped down, so there is an unexpired term in District 4. We did have an applicant. We extended the application process, and we did receive an application from Gretchen Allen, who resides in District 4. We did also receive a second application after after the agenda item was due to be submitted from a Ray La Seekins, and I can forward on that information to you all as well. But at this point in time, the applicants that are in your packet for District 4 include Gretchen Allen, and then we also have Ben Barlett for the Road District Budget Committee, and then Ed Johnson and Patrick Duachek are both applying for the 4-H and Extension District Budget Committee. There are currently, all of these positions have 5 vacancies or 5 budget committee members. And so the Ben Bartlett would then add to Pat O'Grady. So that would be 2 of 5 positions filled on that. The applicants for the 4-H and Extension District, this would make 4 of the 5 positions for the lay budget committee members filled. So any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Any questions? Thank you very much, Monica. And getting back to the agenda here, we have the Tigate presentation. And Commissioner Thompson, I think you can introduce John if you want to here.
I'm telling you, this is a consummation devoutly to be wished.
Yeah.
I had the chance to listen to Dr. Suter. It was, I don't know, a year and a half or 2 years ago, and I thought, man, I just got a whole lot smarter about this issue. I wanted to bring him to talk to us. And getting through the press of business on all sides, we are finally here today with the privilege of listening to Dr. John Suter, Oregon State University Extension Service. You've seen in your packet the information, but I can hardly wait to hear what else he has to say today. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson, other commissioners. You do have the publication that we got out last year through Oregon Sea Grant, which is a higher level overview of a larger study that we did that was funded by the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. If I can share my screen, I'll kind of walk through that fairly quickly because I know your time is limited. So I'm not sure exactly how to share. I'm clicking on the share screen and I'm not getting anything back.
Tom should send you an invite to make you a presenter.
Okay, and where would that be?
Tom, can you send that to him, please?
It's like
He should be.
Okay, so that is good. It looks like
Should be
we're
open to
good
you.
now for it. All right. So, all right. So can you see the screen now?
we can.
With that. All right, great. So what I want to do is I want to talk about the study that we did. Myself and my colleague Guillermo Giannico, who is with Oregon Sea Grant and also has a position in the Fisheries and Wildlife Department at OSU. And we were commissioned to do a study by the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board that really had 4 parts to it. The primary piece was a structured worldwide literature search on the effects of tide gates on fish and water quality. That literature review showed that there, frankly, was not a whole lot of scientific studies out there for it. We uncovered 365 articles. We ended up using 32 of those because they were pertinent to the Pacific Northwest for it. We also reviewed 47 different projects that involve tide gates, and those range from Humboldt County in Northern California all the way up to the Canadian border in the Skagit River Delta in Puget Sound. And so what we were looking for in those projects is what were the project objectives, what were activities involved in the projects, and how did they turn out for it? With the idea that we would think systematically about tide gates and see if we could come up with some synthesis on what we felt the effects of tide gates were and the best way to resolve any adverse effects on fish and water quality. And then at the conclusion of the document, we provided roughly probably 20 pages of findings and recommendations. And the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board has been working through those over the last couple of years or so. So I want to start with talking, kind of getting us all on the same page about kind of how we think about tide gates for it. And so most people who are thinking about tide gates are thinking about just the gate itself. And we've known for a long time, those of us who have been involved in working with and studying tide gates, and in my case, it's been 20 years, my case and Guillermo's case now, it's been 20 years, is that it's not just the gate itself, it's the whole system that the gate is affecting and is installed in. And so typically in a tide gate installation, you have the gates themselves, as you can see here. You have wing walls both on the entrance and the exit sides of the gates, and those really affect how the water velocities flow through the gate and the turbulence and other factors that affect the ability of fish to pass through the gate. With bigger gates, you may have a trash rack in front of it, and if that has a lot of trash and woody debris in it, that can affect passage, but it also keeps that debris out of the gate, which can damage the gate if it sticks in there as the gates close for it. And then upstream from the gates, you have a reservoir pool, and the reservoir pool is really important because that's where the water is stored between the times that the gate is open. So the gate, so we think about this, the gate opens. So if we have this tide cycle here, so you've got the figure on the left here, you have tidal cycles. And so in the blue, you have the tides coming up. These are the elevations. So you have tides coming up and going down over a cycle, and a tide cycle is about 11 hours or so between the highs or between the lows for it. And then the green line is a reservoir pool. So the reservoir pool drains out as the tide is going down. So a tide ebbs, so it goes down, and then once the tide level gets below the reservoir pool level, there's a hydraulic head pressure that starts to push the gate open. And the amount of pressure that is required to push the gate open depends on the gate design and how heavy the gate is. So as the tide continues to go down, the gate opens, and as this gate opens, the water surface elevation in the reservoir pool starts to decrease for it. And then at the end of the tide cycle, the tide is starting to come back up again, to rise again, and that reduces or eliminates the hydraulic head difference between the reservoir pool and the estuary where the tide is, and the gate begins to close, and it stays closed as the tide continues to increase in elevation. And then while that gate is closed, you have any freshwater inflows that are coming from above starting to refill that reservoir pool. And so it's the only thing that you have in this tide, in the that operates the doors in typically, and there's some exceptions to this, but the only factors that you have acting on the door is the opening size and the angle for it, the water velocity that goes through that opening as a result of the head difference between the reservoir pool and the tide level, and that determines how long the door stays open for it. And so these are trade-offs for it, because the bigger the opening you have and the wider the gate is open, you'll have less water velocity, but the reservoir pool will drain faster, which means that the period that it's open is reduced. And if you want to maintain a longer period that it's open, then you have to have a smaller opening size and angle. And if you have a smaller opening size and angle, you have faster water velocity going through that opening. So those are the trade-offs that are involved in the sizing of tide gates for it. And there's really no free lunch here for it. These are physical factors. There's some ways that you can work around them, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But basically, there are those trade-offs between opening size and angle, water velocity, and the period that it's open that you really can't get past. Okay, so the other thing that we tended to look at when we look at tide gates is where they're located in the bigger geography and the larger landscape for it. And there's three different kind of locations for tide gates. There's the ones that we call the stream river mouth ones that are at the mouth of basically a stream as it goes into the estuary. And so we saw from some of the background photos that I've used so far, typically there will be a road across there, and the road forms the dike, and there will be tide gates attached to the drainage structure there for it. There's also tide gates that end up at the mouths of tributary streams. These are smaller streams with it, and those tributary streams can either be located within the reservoir pool of a stream river mouth tide gate, or if you've got an open channel, a slough channel, you can have some of these smaller tributary streams coming in directly in the tidal areas. And then finally, you can have, and the vast majority of tide gates are what we would call field drains. And so they are draining a small, localized area within a pasture typically. And again, those can drain either into a reservoir pool or they can drain into a larger slough. And so the sequence and the layout of where these tide gates are located is important in terms of how fish are able to maneuver between the freshwater grounds, typically if it's salmon, where they're going up to spawn, and where they're rearing and where they're going back out as smolts. Okay, so designs. I've mentioned a couple of designs for this. So historically, most of the tide gates were top hinge designs like this up in the upper left here, where the gate is hinged at the top. That's why they're called top hinge. And then you have a door that is either cast iron, historically a lot were cast iron, or wood. People have fabricated lots of different ways of creating these doors, but they're attached to a culvert or some sort of concrete box drainage structure for it. And again, the tides are coming up and down, and where you have that hydraulic head difference is what's pushing that gate open. Newer designs are side hinged gates. There have been some around for quite some time. The earliest that I found is back in the 1980s. We restarted them when I worked in the Coos watershed in the early 2000s. Side hinge designs have an advantage because they require less head difference to keep open, and then they open wider, because you don't have the weight of the gate trying to push it closed like you do with a top hinge gate. So the only thing that's really working on the resistance to that head difference pushing it open on a side hinge gate is the hinges themselves and the bearing surface for the hinges themselves. There's a couple of newer designs that are trying to be fish friendlier for it. You have self-regulating tide gates. Those are more popular in the eastern US than they are here. Those are by design default open for it. And then when you get high flows or flood flows or high tides, then these balls here, these float balls here, basically rise up and they push the door closed as a result of just the flotation of those balls. But again, those gates are designed as default open, so they don't serve the purpose that a lot of tide gates have been installed for here in the Pacific Northwest. And then finally, there is a more recent design manufactured and created and manufactured just down south of you by Leo Kuntz at Nehalem Design, that instead of having the floats on the estuary side, the tidal side, it actually has a float that opens and keeps the door open that's on the reservoir pool side. So it's the elevation of the reservoir pool that's really controlling how open the gate is on a muted tide regulator. And that's important because really what you're concerned about is a reservoir pool elevation, not necessarily the tidal elevation. So these muted tide regulators are at present absent the self-regulating ones, but the muted tide regulators are the only ones at this point that really satisfy Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife fish passage criteria, which is that the gate has to be open at least 50% of the time for it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. So one of the things I think it's really important to think about is really we have a conventional wisdom where we think that we have these systems, and this is an example from Salmon River down south of Tillamook, but it's really consistent with what we see on the coast. So we have a system here, kind of an example system here, and we have these red dots here that are the tide gates in this system. And so what we're really looking at is how do salmon, and particularly how do coho salmon, because it's a listed species, how do they operate in these systems for it? And so we have a conventional wisdom, which is that the adults migrate in, go into an upper watershed area, spawn, create their reds, spawn, and then the fry and the par, which are the yearling, basically rear up in that same area that they were born in, and then fairly quickly go back down through the system and out to the ocean. And so that's the conventional wisdom. What we've learned over the last 20 years as we've started to look more closely at coho salmon, and particularly as we've started to track them through estuaries with various different types of radio tags, is that there's another 3 life histories in there. Life histories are just different ways that the fish are moving around the system for it. And so we have a life history of fry migrant where they spawn in the upper watershed areas, the eggs hatch, and then the fry, which are really very small, move rapidly down into the lower estuary, what would have been the lower estuary part, or down into the tide gate reservoir pools, and they spend the rest of their first year in freshwater in those areas before they go out to the ocean. There's another life history where the fry actually stay up in the upper watershed areas, but then they move down into what would be the estuary, or they move down into the area of the reservoir pools, and they do their rearing from essentially probably about May through that next March in the lower estuary area, and then they go out to the ocean in March through through May, really, for it. And then finally, we have another pattern, a fourth pattern, where the fry again go down to the lower estuary fairly soon after they hatch. But then as par, in the late summer and then in the next winter, they're moving back upstream and higher in the watershed. So they're getting out of some of those high flows in the larger streams. They rear there, and then in that spring of their second year, they're going back out to the ocean for it. So these 3 other kind of alternative life histories comprise about 40% of, we think, of the populations now. And they're significant because they really provide a lot of resilience. They provide a lot of extra members of the population. And if something goes wrong any particular area of the watershed, there are other fish in that specific population that can be successful and get out to the ocean and then come back and spawn. And so you can see how tide gates and the landscape of tide gates is affecting the ability of these juveniles to be successful during their first year in freshwater. And the larger they are and the better condition they are when they go out to the ocean, the more likely they are to come back and spawn again, or the more likely they are to be available for harvest. Okay, so what do tide gates do? So tide gates have a number of effects on water quality for it. The reservoir pools act, kind of like any other reservoir or pond does, and they tend to get warmer water temperatures in the summer. With that, they can thermally stratify, so you may have cooler water in the bottom and warmer water higher. That higher water temperature means that there's less capability for dissolved oxygen to be saturated in the water. So typically when you have higher water temperatures, you'll have lower dissolved oxygen, and there are some fish species that don't respond well to that for it. With the gate, if the gate is operating as intended, you have this abrupt change in salinity between the estuary side and the brackish water side of it and the freshwater side that's in the reservoir pool. And those abrupt changes in salinity are hard on juvenile fish and smolts. And if a fish gets kind of entrapped in the outflow going out through the tide gate and they're not ready, their body hasn't physiologically adapted to life in salt water, then they're likely not going to be very successful with it. And then finally, like any other reservoir, the sediment transport is inhibited because as soon as that water that's coming down from the upper watershed and that's carrying sediment with it as it's moving out downstream, as soon as that hits the calm water in the reservoir, that sediment tends to drop out. And so you get these deltas built up at the upper end of these reservoir pools, and that tends to waterlog, raise the surface elevation of the stream, and tends to waterlog adjacent fields for it. You also have some effects on fish species too. With that warmer water, with less dissolved oxygen, there's a shift from native species to exotic species in it. And these species tend to be dominated by more warm water species, such as bass and catfish, in contrast to, trout and salmon. We do know from studying some of these improved tide gate designs that if a tide gate such as a muted tide regulator or a side hinge tide gate is there, salmon actually will benefit from that. And we have seen stronger populations. This background picture here is Palouse Creek, and we've been studying Palouse Creek. This is in Coos Bay. It is one of the strongest streams on the coast for salmon, and it has a tide gate in it. So we know that salmon can actually work in tide gated systems. But one of the reasons for that, and this gate is one of the most nastiest ones that you've seen, but one of the reasons for that is it's not just the gate, it's the upstream habitat. And the upstream habitat in Palouse Creek is actually quite good for salmon. Okay, so when we started to look at restoration projects, those 47 restoration projects that we looked at, we found that there were basically 4 common project goals with those. Clearly, there were some projects that were set up to improve fish passage, and that was kind of one of the earlier purposes for these improved designs. We're seeing more projects now that are focused on estuarine rearing habitat as that habitat type has become better recognized as critical for most salmon species. Chinook salmon spend most of their first year in the estuary habitats. with it. And coho, we know through this, looking at these different life histories, estuary rearing habitats are also critical for them. We've also seen a lot of work on flood control. You've got a huge project just south of you in Tillamook, the Southern Flow Corridor project, that one of its primary goals was to help relieve flood pressure in Tillamook. And then there's a host of other infrastructure improvement project goals for it. And then sometimes the infrastructure improvement is just that the landowners in these working landscapes have to have improved tide gates because their current tide gates are at their end of their serviceable life for it. And we also see a lot of combined project goals because that's an easier way to access the different sources of funding that's needed to put together a project. And some of these projects are quite expensive. So what do we get? So one of the strategies is, of course, to remove tide gates for it. And to be completely honest with you, the science says that from a fish perspective, the best tide gate is no tide gate for it because you have unimpeded fish passage and you have these natural processes of the rise and lowering of the tides, creation of a tidal channel network, sediment transport. All of those things are uninhibited and reinitiated there. And so what we see in those kind of projects is typically a multifaceted estuarine restoration approach where you have dike removals, you have channel remeanderings in the area that's opened up, and then ideally you have this trajectory of recovery of that area towards some reference site that would have been would not have had tide gates in it. But we know that that's not feasible in a lot of situations. And what we can do with tide gate upgrades is get an incremental improvement in the area. And so, like I said, the ODFW regulations require that the gate be open at least 50% of the time for it. So 50% is a lot better than, you know, maybe the 10% open that you would get with a traditional tide gate for it. And with devices like the muted tide regulator, you get better fish passage and you get improved water quality because the muted tide regulator allows some flooding tide to come up into the reservoir pool, which means you get mixing of cooler water and somewhat more brackish water so that you have a mixing area in the reservoir pool, and the juvenile salmon can essentially pick their area based on, you know, they'll nose around and find out where the good salinity level is and the good temperature level is. And just to be clear again, it's not just the gate. Just replacing a gate doesn't equal restoration. And it has to be the gate as a part of a larger system. And so you really have to evaluate what the habitat is in that system in order to determine whether it's really worthwhile from a kind of ecological or fish restoration basis. So those incremental improvements typically involve replacing the tide gate, oftentimes with a side hinge gate, and typically with a muted tide regulator. There are some other designs out there that will fit. There's an interesting case in the Coquille River Basin upstream from Bandon, where they have a completely electronic system, and I'll show a picture of that at the end, that can be programmed to open and close with the tides for it. But typically the muted tide regulator that Nehalem Marine makes is the kind of default approach to it now. Another part of it typically is replacing and resizing the complete structure. This is when you get into some significant money because frequently piling and concrete piers and that sort of thing are involved. And there's some work going on right now that funded by the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board to create a sizing tool to help people who are in need of tide gate replacements have a better approach to the sizing piece, where you're trying to balance that opening period with the size for it. And typically, where you're doing these upgrades, the stream mouth is a good location for it, because if you can fix the gate at the stream mouth, then you have the possibility of working on the habitat both upstream from the gate as well as downstream for it. So again, the incremental improvements will get you fair ways while still being able to maintain some part of a working landscape above the tide gate. So that's it. I'm open to questions if you have time for it. If not, I'm certainly willing to, as Commissioner Thompson knows, willing to talk a lot about this stuff. So I will leave it at there and turn it back to you all.
Any questions for Dr. Souter? Commissioner Webb.
Well, as the chair is probably ready to stipulate, I have about 1,000 questions. Mark has been working hard in the past couple of years to educate me about dikes and diking districts and tide gates, and I'm at about 10% in my journey right now. But you referenced a couple of times the dikes. What's the relationship between what happens in a tide gate and what happens in a much larger linear dike system?
Well, so I think the short answer is that typically you have a dike which is installed to prevent water coming into an area for it. So that area behind the dike at some point would have been either a floodplain or an estuarine wetland for it. So at that point, the dike has cut off, a certain amount of habitat for it. But if you had a dike without a tide gate on it, you would either have a pool of water behind the dike because everything coming down from the hillsides would be caught by the dike, and the dike would be acting as a dam, or you have a culvert in the dike, which means that then you would have water going both ways, because without a tide gate on it, when the tide came up or a floodwater came up, it would go back behind the dike for it. So you really don't have a tide gate without some sort of dike, and typically you don't have a dike without some sort of tide gate in it. So they're really kind of linked with it. Now there's a lot of efforts, and we've seen this in mitigation, where you just remove the tide gate and you leave the dike and you let that flushing start to come back, that tidal flushing start to come back in the area behind the dike. Now, that takes a long time to recover, because one of the things that happens behind a dike is that you've got the land surface subsiding and going down with it, because the organic matter in that area breaks down over time. And then typically you would have the flooding that previously came in would have been bringing sediment in, and the sediment that it brought in and dropped out kind of would counterbalance the subsidence from the organic material breaking down. So when you just opening up an area is maybe the first step to restoration. But you also have to be concerned about what the surface elevation is in that area, because if you just open it up, then typically you'll get mud flats in there because the surface elevation is low. And if your desire is to get some, and there's nothing wrong with mud flats, but they don't typically tend to be in short supply for it. What typically tends to be in short supply is higher quality estuarine wetlands with it, and to have those, you have to match the ground surface elevation to the tidal level.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, can you come back and give us another analysis of diking issues?
I could do that, and I would love to do that. And I'm scheduled for my second vaccine on my birthday, which is Sunday. So give me at least 2 weeks after that, and I love Astoria, so I would be happy to come back and talk about that. The best way to do this really is to go out and go out in the field and look at this stuff and talk with the landowners, because the landowners, you know, the landowners are the ones that have had to deal with this problem a lot, and so they're they're important voices to hear from in this. And they have some, there's been an effort that that AOC has led. There's this Tidegate working group that you may have heard about that's been having discussions about a number of issues, but probably the most significant one is how to get a permitting process that actually has a decision made to it, and how to get these upgrades made. So there's some interesting stuff going on right now. By the way, the ODFW is revising its fish passage rules right now, not just for tide gates, but also for other culverts instructions. And they just extended the comment period for that, which was going to expire on April 9th. That was just extended to May 7th. So that's something that you might want to keep your eye on, because it certainly affects your county public works with culverts and road work for that. So.
Thank you so much. I could do this all day.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, I know that you can't. No, other people can't. So.
Commissioner Thompson has a question.
All right.
Thank you. Well, I thought Commissioner Webb would be happy. I thought Commissioner Tayoka would be over the moon to see all those graphs and charts and vectors and all that stuff going on. And so here we are looking at the intersection of the ecology, the economy, we're looking at climate change. How do we balance all this as a board of county commissioners? How do we have a common understanding so that we can have data-infused discussions and make good public policy? And in my mind, inviting Dr. Suter here was a way to start that process, or to accelerate, let me say, that process, because I've been talking about the issues of dikes and floodgates and levees and all that kind of stuff for a while, but I don't really have the background. So I don't know how we organize ourselves. Chair Quila, I don't know if you've got ideas about how we organize ourselves so that we do a comprehensive job to deal with climate change, the economy, the ecology, the biology, all of that. But I'm interested in putting that in our basket as a county board of commissioners, that we consider that this is a significant area and we want to focus on it. So perhaps it's an addendum to our strategic plan. I'm looking to you for leadership and comment on this, Mark.
Well, I do appreciate this being the origin of a discussion that's greater. I think, it's a case-by-case basis, as the doctor just referenced, about where you can do projects and where you can't. City of Warrenton is an example where you have 36 tide gates, 9 miles of levees, and you have a very low elevation. Probably 75% of the city is below the high water mark. So just opening up and removing tide gates will not solve an issue. And you have developed property, you have land use issues. But I think there are definitely areas where you can look at things like this muted tidal regulator, the MTRs, which my only concern about them is the cost. I know that they're extremely expensive. I think they can be a solution in regulating the reservoirs and the water level on the inside of the levee. And there might be some areas for application in not just Clatsop County, but in Warrenton and in other areas. I think of the airport being one critical area where we need to control what the water level is. But at the same time, we have a tie gate there that is well managed or regulated as a muni title regulator could possibly deal with that. So it's something I think that's worth looking at. But yeah, we've got a lot of tie gates and levies that are going to need an evaluation, and I think this is a good place to start. I really appreciate the doctor coming and presenting, and I hope that we can continue discussion at some other work sessions.
Okay. Always pleasure, and it's taken a while, like Commissioner Thompson said, to get this to come through, but I'm hopeful that we can continue to cooperate in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate the presentation.
Right. Okay, thank you. Take care now.
Thanks. And next on the agenda, we have the discussion on Habitat Conservation Plan, which is on page 38. And we had, I know that Commissioner Bangs has worked hard on this. I know she met with County Manager to develop some draft comments to NEPA. And Commissioner Bangs, do you want to go ahead and outline some of those?
Helps if I have my mic on. But yeah, no, I can definitely do this. So I think the compass of what we are trying to present to NOAA Fisheries during the NEPA process is not whether or not we are contesting the need for an HCP. I think that we can all agree on being supportive of an HCP, but it's the one that ODF presented, and I'll speak personally right now. I'm actually pretty deeply disappointed by it and saddened by it about the draft that they presented to NOAA Fisheries. The whole idea was to improve both the financial and conservation outcomes on our state forests. And looking at the plan and reading through it, it really fails on both fronts. Speaking economically, this plan will have a major impact both upfront and over an extended period of time. The most blatant impact will be the 25% reduction of state lands and funds that the county receives. This large reduction in harvestable acres will directly impact not only our general fund, but our industry members, resulting in job loss and potential mill closures. Looking beyond the direct impacts, we will also receive hits at each of our small taxing districts: rural fire, schools, Clatsop Care, the port, 4-H extension. There's going to be direct winners and losers of this because it's not equal across the county. And then I was looking at the county's general fund and all the special things that our timber revenue goes to fund, such as the CCA and the Houseless Population Services and other grants and special programs that our general fund goes to. And then over time, this trickle effect, it's going to be devastating in my personal opinion. This will not be operating our forests with the greatest permanent value in mind. I look at 30 years ago versus now, and there's still communities that have never recovered from these forest policies. I mean, granted, they were federal forest policies, but it's policies that ODF now wishes to put into place. And so I was looking at the plan and the acres placed in reserve. I question the logic of it because there's some blatant habitat acres that are not included in the plan. And that's really concerning to me. They're very visible acres. They're well-known acres that should have been protected. One specifically is over next to the wildlife, the elk reserve. And so while those acres aren't included in the plan, and they are habitat acres, we have acres that aren't habitat that are included. And I have asked multiple times for reasoning or accounting for why say this plot or this stand of trees that is 5 years old is placed in the habitat conservation plan when it's not going to ever reach a habitat potential within the 75 years that it'll be there. And so I've asked for an accounting, I've asked for reasoning behind it, and haven't received any answers. I asked about the boundaries specifically. Was there any wiggle room? And I was told no, there is no wiggle room from ODF perspective. And then I've asked repeatedly, can we find 5 acres? Because 5 acres will pay one teacher for 1 year at market value. And I'm really concerned that, you know, I'm of a belief that each acre and each stand that's placed in this HCP needs to have an explanation. Because 100 acres equals 2 teachers for a decade. And I use this only as an example of how impactful each acre is to our community. And then I segue to a third thought, which is fire season. With job loss, we will also see a loss in resources to fight fires. What happened in Tillamook this past summer could easily happen to us. Fire could blaze. The state could be in a position where they can provide 0 available resources, and it'll be up to our local private industry and our rural fire departments to fight that fire. With the potential of this private industry impact that this HCP will have, and also the impact on our small rural taxing districts in the form of the fire departments, who's going to be here to fight that blaze? I mean, if we have job loss and industry closures and, you know, defunding of rural taxing districts, who's going to be here? Like, we're facing the trickle effect is pretty extreme. And so I'm hoping through this NEPA process that the federal agencies consider other viable alternatives that hopefully will generate more and consistent revenue for us than what is projected from the ODF plan, because the health and well-being of our community really depends on it. And I'm seeing projected lows of $4 million a year for our county when this plan is put into place. And so that goes from, you know, our projected highs of 32 million and last year's 19 million. That's a dramatic impact. That's 75% direct impact on our monies that our county and our small taxing districts receive. So I think the letter was attached to the email, or a draft was attached to the email that was sent to each of us. As I said earlier, I've only gotten through about 450 pages of this HCP of 989, and I have made note of at least 3 habitat stands that have not been included in the HCP, which causes concern to me. They're well over 120 years old, and I see a lot of 5-year-old and 10-year-old stands that won't reach habitat age that are included, which also causes concern. And then our bread and butter has taken a 50% hit. Our 80-year-old stands, where those are our harvestable stands, those have been reduced by about 50%. And so it's going to have long-reaching economic impacts, and I'm pretty concerned about that. So.
Well, yeah, thank you, Commissioner Banks. You know, it's really hard to react to something that's 1,000 pages in such a short period of time. I do see that the deadline was extended 2 weeks, so we do have till April 21st for the public scoping comment period. So it's not tomorrow, it's actually going to be till the 21st that we can submit comments. I know, Commissioner Thompson, you had some discussions on this, and you've talked with Commissioner Magruder in Columbia County.
I did. You know, this is it goes to the heart of us, doesn't it? How do we have a habitable planet? How do we have an economy that works. We have to have businesses that make a profit and pay taxes, or we don't have jobs. How do we do that going forward as a board, taking all of it into account? And rather than, I didn't go too far afield. I crossed the county line and asked Commissioner Magruder to send me some documents that the Columbia County Board of Commissioners had forwarded. And I thought, well, let's consider those. So they were in the county manager's Friday report. I don't want us to hasten into a contentious back and forth. What I want us to do is to work together to talk about our hopes and our dreams for this county now and going forward. But it's our county, it's also the whole world. Remembering that the real cost of everything is always paid by somebody. So we need a tax base in order to provide services. That's our community. That's what we took an oath to be: nonpartisan county commissioners, volunteers who, for the love of this county and its people, said we want to serve. So we've got a little more time. Commissioner Banks, thank you for yeoman service, yeoman service in, I thought, oh, thank you, God, I don't have to read that, because Commissioner Banks will go with a fine tooth comb. I mean, I'm going to look at it, but I know you have the expertise to consider the actual trees on the ground, that ground truthing that ODF talks about. Commissioner Webb, I know you're passionately devoted to the well-being of the physical world, the water and the soil and the air and all of that, as am I. The question is, how do we balance that, working together as colleagues who respect each other's point of view, who are profoundly committed to good governance and this place and its people? So that's why those documents are in there. Today, we're almost at the end of your time, Mr. Chair, so I want to be respectful of that and just say, this is the first take at it. This is the first look at it. Let's consider how we go forward together as a unified body to do good work for our people and our place. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Toyoka.
Well, I'm going to, kind of dovetail on what both Commissioner Bangs and Thompson said, that, okay, hopefully it is a first draft, but, from even AOC briefings and Council Forest Land Trust, you read the ACP that they came out with, and along, aside the whole fiscal side, the management strategies that are outlined in the HCP now seem counterintuitive to everything that AOC and Council of Forest Land Trust. I mean, seemingly there are so many other better ways on these management strategies and outlined in the HCP that are better for the habitat, better for the forest, better for everything. It just seems like, they're slanted one direction. They haven't looked at the whole picture, seemingly, and if I looked at the AOC point papers and, like I said, the HCP that was presented to us seems very counterintuitive to everyone else who has more expertise. So as we review that, I would like to look at, kind of us to address the management strategy as well, because I don't think it addresses it properly in the current rendition they have.
Thank you, Commissioner Toyoka. I reviewed what the county manager had as a draft letter, and I thought it was a fairly good one. I mean, it really does kind of address the issues that we want to, be involved in this process. We want a seat at the table. We want to, have a full grasp of the economic impacts on what this could mean for us. So those are things that I agree with, and certainly I think we can continue this discussion. You know, it's interesting in parallels. We just had this presentation on tide gates and watersheds and wetlands, and we're talking about forestry. I mean, these are huge subjects, and trying to find that balance is not everybody's going to agree where that balance lies. But that's what we're here for. We're going to try to do our best to bring in, you know, both our own experiences and bring in the information that's presented to us and try to make those decisions to our best of our ability. I see Commissioner Banks has a question.
Well, it's just to dovetail kind of what everybody is saying here is really wanting a seat at the table to have the discussions, because we have a lot of stands here in Clatsop County that have socio impacts, not just economic, but socio. And had we been able to have discussions with ODF regarding locations of where these HCPs are, where these reserve areas are, we could have presented our stands that have a social import to our constituents and maybe avoided future issues. And the fact that they haven't allowed us to have these conversations with them and present our concerns, and then also to have our concerns heard, has really been telling to me on how they're not concerned about how we as a county need to function from here on out. And so it's not just the economic impact, it's the social impact also here, that they're not listening to or interested in our concerns. And, you know, when Commissioner Thompson talks about a worldwide impact, when I look at issues that Russia is facing and issues that Canada is facing, because our burden is going to be pushed into other countries now, and our prices are going to increase. I mean, this will impact not just here in Clatsop County in our state, but this will impact worldwide. And it's not all going to be a positive or all going to be a negative impact, but it's going to impact worldwide. So, sorry, thank you.
Any other discussion? I really apologize that I have to jump off here in a few minutes. We've had a lot on our work session agenda today. We do have regular meeting for the 14th, or excuse me, for the 14th, work session and regular meeting. Then we also have a work session for the 20th. So we do have a couple opportunities to refine this comment before we submit. So we can probably bring this back at a work session and discuss again.
Please do.
Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? Well, thank you for a good meeting. I appreciate the discussion today very much. Hope you all have a good rest of your Tuesday. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.